Hi guys, in honor of World Storytelling Day, I would like to read you a little bit from my newest book, Mhorag, Prophecy of Hope, Book 2, available now. Darkness. Darkness is alive in a strange sort of way. Its substance is twisted and complex. Some say it presses in, but true darkness is not so easy to spot. True darkness begins with a thought. It kisses and whispers, and you let it in. It grows so easily in the deep, moist recesses of life. You scarcely recognize the trap until you are already locked in its cage, and all else is crushed, dominated, and silenced within the black. Such is the nature of darkness. I should know. I am that darkness. I remember when I was no more than an errant thought in the mind of another. I remember being the wretched stain marring the glory of the kingdom. I remember biting a god and tasting life for the first time. I am a predator, but I feel like prey as my heart races in the utter black of this hour, and my substance penetrates upward from the hollows of existence, slowly, painfully infecting the rotting world above, as battered souls still clinging to their lives suffocate in the quicksand of my rising void. As I advance through the broken shields into the matter of life, eating it away like acid. What does my prey fear in this moment? What do you fear as the world finally fades to black and light dies? And the only evidence of something more is the thud of my hidden heart driving you slowly mad. Thud, 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 thud. A heart I had stolen. A heart without a body, without blood, yet still beating all around. Thud, 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 thud. And what do I fear as I listen to the cries of my prey, starved and trapped? Am I so different from them, always clawing for more, never escaping the horror, the futility of my own existence? Layer upon layer, year upon year, I grow stronger. And yet, I cannot stop the whispers breathed out against me so long, long ago. Hope is still graven into the very fabric of existence, scarred into time and space, emblazoned into the ancient foundations above and below, foundations I have yet to overthrow. And as I rise in this time between times, in this place between places, over this world between worlds, I am forced to acknowledge yet another disruption to my beautiful darkness on this, the eve of damnation. Elysium Fallen. The city empire of Mhorag, ruled by the temple of Fiacra, long ago. Please, Nada cried weakly, as his body dropped and his weight dragged him down against the manacles binding his mutilated wrists. He hung suspended by his hands over the oubliette. He writhed against the bonds, his face raised toward the only freedom, while his nostrils filled with the reek of aged urine, human feces, and blood rising from the bowels of the temple. His body slapped painfully against close, wet walls of ancient stone as he was lowered through the shaft toward his doom. He tried not to think about the mire coating everything when he struggled, pulling himself up against the chains. His quickly numbing fingers groped at his bonds. Already the numbness was spreading, aided by the cavernous chill of this dungeon. He drew in a rasping breath between chattering teeth. Please, don't do this, Father. Fear crept into his voice, nearly paralyzing the sound. Even so, the faint cry, echoed in the untold depths that still waited to swallow him. The high priest appeared above him with a cold smile that parted a mature face in a subtle ripple effect through the ample folds of well-nourished skin. And Fallon was not an old man. His brown hair still held the succulence of youth, yet there was a wild roughness about him, attained only by a lifetime of violent and charismatic existence. "The master is suffering, my boy," he answered, with an insane fervor. Nuttig's eyes locked with his father's. Even at this wrong angle, he could read the evil determination in them. He gagged around a strangled cry as the binding shuddered beneath Fallon's controlling hands. His body sank deeper, further from freedom. The already pitiful sound of his cry degenerated into a whisper, resounding down into an ominous silence. He spiraled over the secret chamber, feeling its menacing shroud coil and around him as if it was alive. And Fallon's smile quickly faded as he watched the boy cast a wild glance downward. Ratty blonde hair whipped haphazardly around the younger one's face as he looked further down the hole of this forgotten place. No doubt his son prayed the sound had not been heard, but prayers were empty in this land. Hope, a fool's dream. The priest forced himself to feel nothing as he marveled silently at the deeply embedded, scarred and re-scarred knots of tissue standing angrily out of the rest of the boy's bruised, undernourished flesh. The bite of the master, some would say, the bite of a monster or a demon. He had heard the whispers of the firstborns in their cages, and he knew all about the scourge that was the lowborns, outcasts, criminals, stolen firstborn sacrifices, street rats, haters of the sacred, all, whose primary goal was to undermine this temple, destroy the master and his dependent hordes, and thus transform the infrastructure of their entire reality by any means necessary. Sudden anger seized the high priest, even as the first sounds of movement slithered through the hidden waters, up to their ears from the Lord's abysmal bed. One heartbeat of horror, and Nuttig writhed upward again, with enough strength to clutch desperately at his father's fingers, stiff in their constricting red leather gloves. Yet the boy's thin face was empty of hope and dignity. Depravity was written in his hollow eyes, beaten there since birth. The boy knew what was coming even before his hands slipped away, and he fell jarringly downward against the shackles. He knew hope for reprieve was useless. He knew he was nothing. Still, in another time and place, Nuttig could have been a prince, a commander of men in fanatic loyalty. He was of the right stock and bloodline even now, but in Mhorag, being human came at a high cost, and being firstborn meant only one thing, and it was not power. And Fallon manipulated the chains, allowing Nuttig's body to drop a little further. As long as the master suffers, all Mhorag will suffer. Every second hastens the demise of the entire empire. You know as well as I, there is no peace without bloodshed, no bounty without sacrifice. Accept it, son. One must face the raw, inescapable anguish set before us, and better it be you than I. Nuttig cast another wild glance downward. A sick feeling lurked in the pit of his stomach. The thick residue of the air coated his taste buds with the foulness of the monster, sliding up the veiled throat of the pit. Soltar has set, and Fallon continued, as if this fact alone justified his actions now. Everyone knew the 4 bright stars that governed the heavens over Mhorag. The most constant were the twins Athundel and Azul, supergiants looming high and distant over the land, with the fixed point known as true north spaced between them. Their blue light lent its soft glow to the long hours, never waning, never waxing. The third star was Quasel, which revolved around Athundel in cycles of reflected light and shadow, while the fourth, Soltar, the brightest star, shone for periods measured in decades and then vanished for an equal measure. The cause of such a phenomenon was unknown and unavoidable. Its rising and setting was the arbiter of unpredictable seasons of bounty and deprivation. In the cages, they knew well the cost of Soltar's setting. Nuttig squirmed defiantly in his chains, though every effort to escape was futile. Nonetheless, his muscles rippled with his every desperate movement. Already the shadows grow long, and the waters rise, and the deep cold sets in. Do you know what that means for Mhorag if the master's warming should fail? The high priest studied the boy he had never allowed himself to love, so much like the beloved mother lost to them both. He clenched himself against the feelings tearing at him. You know, he said slowly, it speaks to your strength, my boy, that you have lived to bear so many scars. There was always such a shortage of good specimen. I am proud of you. He gave Nuttig a derisive smile. But with these days of deprivation coming hard and fast upon our world, the master is in greater need. I wonder if you will survive this time. If not, it is no great loss, I don't suppose. And you should have no regrets. 17 is rather old for a firstborn human, don't you think? He mused more to himself than to anyone else. The hatred in the boy's eyes said more than words ever could, and Fallon felt nothing as the boy dropped closer and closer to the black mouth of the commodious pit, whose bottom was deep and dark and wet, whose occupant was awake and cold and voracious with hunger. Nuttig sucked in a hiss of pain as his body twisted back from the moist, slapping sounds, creeping nearer to his dangling feet. He choked around another cry. Sweat trickled down his armpits as he struggled to no avail against the bonds. This was not the first time he had been forced to face the monster who held the entire realm in thrall. He knew he couldn't outrun it, not merely because of the chains or the walls or even the armed men above with his father. His skin crawled, his breath quickened, and for several horribly long moments the whole scene took on a dreamlike quality before his unblinking eyes. A dream in which he remained a frozen observer, while his mind screamed and his lungs heaved. His ragged breaths puffed whitely in the air. The seconds were dragging. The whole yawned before his wild eyes, stretching with increasing darkness into unimaginable depths, out of which came a shrieking howl. In that moment, he felt the horror anew, as the icy chill of the creature's breath crept out of the hole and into his bones. The howl of the master permeated the whole of Mhorag, high and low, and everywhere in between. Slowly, a form breached the surface. Nuttig swayed in its cold aura, feeling its ice run deep. His throat closed around a scream. A sickening wave of terror welled up from his belly. His mind raced even as that familiar sinking feeling crept through him. The thing worshipped by the world shuddered toward him, each lost inch robbing him a little more of hope. He swallowed at the lump in his throat. Soon, all the master's parts would take control of his every move. It would rob him of his very life. It would beat and break and steal his humanity from him. And even then, there was no guarantee he would die and it would end. His every instinct screamed for him to run, but there was nowhere he could go. The master caught him by the ankle, a great weight pulling him down. Searing pains filled his chest. He felt as if he was being stretched from all sides, and abruptly the loud popping sounds of his arms being torn from their sockets echoed around his twisting frame. He screamed then. The sound cut short as the air was knocked from his lungs by the intense cold crawling inside him. His bare foot plunged into the murky hole as the creature groped higher, calf, thigh, part by part, slowly higher, intrusive in its touch. Mhorag's nostrils filled with its reek, his heart hammered in his chest, his breath came in even more ragged gasps. The master mounted him like a serpent slithering over a rock, yet with all the weight and will of a man beneath its slimy, wet frame. He saw its face emerging from the dark. It seemed to glow against the black. Its variegated, cyanotic albino flesh hung loose in places, reminiscent of a snake shedding its skin. Its eyes were ringed in crimson, its stare hypnotic. Mhorag swallowed dryly at the knot constricting his throat. The master was everywhere, rippling and oozing along his body. He wanted to turn his face away, to grit his teeth against the excruciating brush of its icy, gelatinous flesh, yet his body hung limp as the master slowly took him, and its deep, damp coldness coated every nerve. Pain scorched through freezing synapses. His body convulsed, flopping beneath the master, suddenly and violently like a fish out of water in its last suffocating seconds of life. There was something about the pain, its blinding shock, that strangely comforted him, and he eased him toward surrender. He was almost thankful when the moment came that he could no longer feel the weight of his own body. He was drifting beyond, weightless, suspended outside the confines of flesh and bone, his vision blurred, and yet, somehow, he could see, no longer the seemingly bottomless chamber and its merciless master, but something further beyond, which appeared to be falling into him. Some deep part of himself wanted this impossible reality, succumbing for one blessed moment to the calling and its strange awakening fire. A rush of heat sheathed up through him like an invisible flame through his synapses, through his muscles and organs, and even his bones, while the portion of his mind imprisoned in the moment knew it couldn't be real. Could it? A faint heartbeat echoed beneath the surface of his altered awareness. Halos of light swelled with its rhythm through the shadows, each pulse more real than the last, riding on the air that whistled eerily through the entombed chamber. The whisper of presence seeped in, circling his body in a rushing wave, before alighting before him in a slowly spiraling wind that even more slowly took on a darkly insubstantial semblance of humanity, as if the veil was being drawn back. Drops of light began to dew from strands of hair, air back to the breathing, vaporous apparition before him. And then a very real hand reached out to him through the light, as if in answer. The specter had become one with the fuming fire, controlling the light, transcending it. A boy hovered there now, with skin having a shimmering opalescent luster as it bled flame from bending light in spreading undulations and wild shades of color. His hand was pale and flawless, wreathed from within by streams of gold, and from without by cascading flames of blue and white and purple, and holding an expanding universe in his palm. Those same delicate fingers that held the impossible brushed his eyes. Mhorag gasped as his body jerked beneath the weight of both the master and the otherworldly vision. His eyes rolled to the whites as time ground to a halt. Another cry was strangled in the taut line of his throat, but not even the master's cruel touch could pull him back from the edge. He was afraid to move, afraid to breathe, afraid of the other world opening before him, even knowing the horror he was being allowed to leave behind, at least for one moment, at least in his mind. An oasis sprawled on the horizon, too far away, almost nothing, just a shimmering fracture of light, yet upon that spark stood radiant beings, more wraith than substance. They stood in utter silence, as still as stone, everything frozen around them, everything holding its breath as they remained too still. Their breath lasted days without sun and nights without moon, and yet the flame of that world only grew. How did he know that? A whisper indiscernible from the light resounded across the breach, flowing over the hand that somehow seemed to be pulling everything into itself. Did he really hear the words that sounded in his brain, or was it all in his mind? I have searched you and known you. My eyes saw you when you were not yet formed. I formed you and covered you. I laid my hand upon you. Come to me and take of my life, and I will give you a heart to know me. Your flesh shall rest in hope, and I shall be its strength. You shall be bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh, a limb of my body, my flesh, my bone, and I will make you a great nation. All who bless you I will bless. All who curse you I will curse. Your people will be like the stars, innumerable, and your throne will not fall. Your line will not fail. Your bones will not turn to dust till the promised comes. Do you believe? Mhorag lifted his head deliriously. That was not the voice of either a man or a monster he heard upon the air. Phantom breaths of flame crackled over him. He could almost see the one who called, burning, always burning, the starlit hand still reaching for him, only one small part of a greater whole not yet seen. He watched flames spark upon the temple mount, seeming to ignite all its high towers against the darkness, glass and steel mimicking the movement of candlelight as they scraped the sky for miles, giving definition to even this murkiest bowl of Mhorag that was not so forgotten and far removed from the world as it appeared. He shuddered as he turned his pale face into the sudden burning wind flowing through the expanse. More whispers slipped through the folds of time and space, the radiant ones beyond coming to life. Their voices dripped with everything like the voices of angels singing. They emanated from the light and the galaxies spinning upon the beckoning hand that made two very different worlds touch. Let the light shine forth and awaken hope. Let Mhorag arise. Let the promised come. Do you believe? The question echoed around him, demanding he face the deepest truths of his heart. Did he believe those unimaginable promises? Could he believe these whispers, these unexplainable visions? Did he dare to hope? Do you believe, Mhorag Flegan? See, I have stopped the world for you. Will you accept me? Or will you remain the prey, caught in the mire? Mhorag trembled. Who was this one that called him by name? Whose very words gripped his heart, pulling the hidden parts of himself toward an eternal precipice of fate? He hesitated. Every sensation struck deeper, searing like lightning through his body. Flame was everywhere. He could smell it, taste it. It was becoming real. He wanted it to rise and burn this world. It wanted to rise and purge. He could feel the power, the contained fury, roiling from the fabric of existence. His breath ragged, he rode the burning sensations between distorted realities. Was he calling now without knowing how? Old fears and new gripped him, pulling him in opposite directions. Reality was a blur, which slowly tried to dig its way back into his mind, while his heart hovered in flame. Only flame, not of this world. The burning filled him, quickening in his heart, and the blood roaring in his ears, to the point that, for an instant, he thought he could reach out and return the touch of the beckoning hand, despite his numbness, despite his change, despite his disjointed bones. It seemed so close, so real. The individual stars of its universe suddenly seemed close enough to take on distinctions all their own, each one orbiting into alignment upon the palm of that beckoning hand. Mhorag trembled. His eyes struggled to maintain the sight, clenching himself desperately upon the coherent thought filtering through his sluggish mind. "I want to believe," he gasped. The walls and the darkness shifted in and out as if they were breathing with him. The master seemed to change. Mhorag thought he could see through the consuming flesh bone into the stolen heart within. A horrible stillness swallowed away all sound, even his ragged gasps. The atmosphere shimmered. "Will you help my unbelief?" The caller didn't speak. The faint shimmer of gold from the faded form of a hand didn't move. Only the stars moved on those ghostly fingers, tiny sparks that burned with everlasting fire and slowly thawed from the dark, becoming real again. The air popped with the smell of fire. Mhorag did not comprehend how his face shone like a sun in that moment, nor how the master shrieked, rising off of him in the perverse undulation of fear and need, at the unseen breath which ignited that crackling storm of fire. Flame rushed in from all sides. The air shifted. Nor did he know all that would come in its wake, as his spirit stretched between where his body hung and where the flame pooled. Steel warped and glass cracked, and the whole temple of Fiacra began to shatter down the face of his world in an ominous rain as the burning snatched him forward by his bones. He was falling, and the darkness was falling, both of them into the flames. Mhorag did not feel the burning as it purged him of the broken pieces of the only life he had ever known, and consumed him for a hope and future he could not even begin to imagine. Yet that future came upon him with a roar. So beautiful was the sound, so consuming, every weight bowed before it. The air no longer felt misaligned around his body. His skin no longer crawled. He raised his head, forced his eyes to open. With his head still spinning, Mhorag staggered to his feet. A strong arm came around his middle. He had not come through the flames alone. The arm anchored him against the beating currents of great white wings that caught the light of a strange new star, flaring and shimmering in the too bright sky. Even as darkness came shrieking down upon those racing wings, it ruptured into flames, burning shadows wherever it touched the life before them, a life that hung upon the heavens, pierced through by the greater light of a still higher flame. Burning shadows everywhere. It touched the life before them. Darkness battled against that flame, yet the holy fire seared its mark in a perfect circle, driven wide by the whirlwind flying off those churning wings. Its embers filled the air with the intoxicating scent of life, even as blood dripped down the shining visage of the great white salvation. "Cure," his heart shouted. "Life, Caladrius." Of purest white was that noble creature he called Caladrius. Having no color, no blackness, not in its graceful body of glass and scales, nor in its feathered wings, nor in tail, nor talon, nor especially in voice. And yes, a voice can have a color, but that is a tale for another time. The sound that came from Caladrius's lips was as pure as a dawn, and like a dawn it heralded a new day. Light glistened in Caladrius's whiteness. Only in its eyes did color leak through, and oh, what color! Those eyes, they burned in wheels of blue fire, circled through with gold as Caladrius loomed up out of inevitable doom. Caladrius, a merciful and righteous winged protector, a fierce scale beast, breather of fire, a shield in a raging storm, a formidable yet gentle being whose footsteps shook the earth, whose voice exceeded any instrument with its beauty and any weapon with its power, bringer of light and blessing, hope and cure. Flame burned within it, rising to the bidding of its higher source. Holy fire seared through every vessel of that great body. Flame ignited its heart, but it was the dreams of God that flowed out. Caladrius was the slave. Living flame was the master. Caladrius gave himself over to that primordial fire with a long, shuddering sigh of lighted breath. For this flame, unlike all other flames, comes from life, power, everything. And the elements bowed, and the air filled with the intoxicating scent of life. And to its shadow came a people out of time and flame, from origins now shrouded in legend. Refugees of a society of death, they chose to be harbingers of a higher life. Their world is lost to the fluidity of time and space, yet this much is remembered. They came flooding across dimensions interconnected by an all-consuming power and promise to a new world. No sign of that rejected ancestral land remains, except what these few words express. For as it is recorded